Every so often, the past refuses to stay buried. Something unexpected rises from the ground, an artifact that doesn't fit any timeline, any culture, or any explanation we currently have. It sparks headlines, ignites debates, and sends researchers scrambling for answers. But once the excitement fades, these objects are quietly filed away, stored in drawers, hidden in museum basements, or buried in academic papers no one agrees on. In this episode, we're uncovering 15 of the most baffling discoveries ever recorded, ancient maps showing coastlines no explorer should have known, artifacts written in languages no one can decode, and sealed temples untouched for centuries. Together, they point to a past far more complex and far more mysterious than what we've been taught. These discoveries are real. They're documented. And after you see them, you'll understand exactly why history tried to keep them in the dark. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe for weekly deep dives into the forgotten chapters of our ancient world. Now let's begin. Deep in the jungles of southern Mexico, where a civilization older than the Aztec, the Maya, and nearly every culture in the Americas once thrived. Long before the temples of Teotihuacan pierced the sky or the pyramids of the Yucatan rose from the jungle, another culture was already shaping the land with impossible precision. The Olmec, the oldest known civilization of the Americas, were carving monuments so colossal and sophisticated that even modern engineers struggle to explain them. Their most iconic creations, the colossal heads of La Venta, remain among the greatest archaeological enigmas ever uncovered. 17 of these massive sculptures have surfaced across the modern states of Veracruz and Tabasco, each one different from the next, each one carved from a single giant boulder of volcanic basalt. Some tower nearly 10 feet high. Others lie half buried beneath roots and vines, their stone faces staring out from the jungle like silent guardians of a forgotten age. The first head was found in 1862 by a farm worker clearing land near Tres Zapotes. It was so perfectly sculpted that early explorers insisted it had to be a natural formation, until more began to appear in the early 1900s. Suddenly, archaeologists realized they weren't looking at tribal art, but at the work of master engineers. These monuments were created between 1500 and 400 BC, at a time when Rome didn't exist, Greece hadn't risen, and Egypt's new kingdom was fading into memory. What baffles researchers isn't just their scale, but the impossible logistics behind them. The basalt used to carve the heads came from the Tuxtla Mountains, over 50 miles away. The Olmec had no wheels, no metal tools, no beasts of burden, and yet they moved stones weighing 10 to 40 tons through swamps and jungle so dense it challenges modern excavation teams. To transport a single block would have required hundreds of workers, ropes, wooden rollers, sleds, and rafts. Yet there's no archaeological trace of the roads, pathways, or extensive infrastructure such a project would demand. Some scholars propose river transport. Others imagine complex wooden frameworks and sleds. But none of these theories fully explain how the stones were lifted, positioned, and carved with astonishing precision. Because basalt, especially Olmec basalt, is harder than granite. And the Olmec shaped it using nothing more than stone hammers, fire treatment, and sand abrasion. The curves of the helmets, the defined cheeks, the lifelike expressions, all created with a level of craftsmanship far ahead of their time. Even today, no one fully understands how they did it, or why. To shape it using the primitive tools available at the time would have required thousands of hours of constant labor. Yet the finish on the heads is smooth, almost polished. Their facial features are deeply incised, the proportions mathematically balanced. Whoever carved them possessed not just artistic skill, but an advanced understanding of geometry and material science far beyond what was thought possible in Mesoamerica 3,000 years ago. Each head is distinct, with unique features that many believe represent real individuals. Some have broad noses, full lips, and almond-shaped eyes, traits unlike those of later Mesoamerican peoples. The headdresses they wear resemble protective helmets, some decorated with intricate designs or animal symbols. Archaeologists debate their meaning. Were they rulers immortalized in stone, warriors wearing ceremonial gear, or perhaps deities depicted in human form to bridge the gap between man and God? A few fringe researchers have gone further, pointing out that the features of the heads don't match any known indigenous group from the region. Some early explorers in the 19th century even speculated that they resembled people of African or Polynesian descent, leading to theories of ancient transoceanic contact. While mainstream scholars reject those claims as speculative, the question remains, why do these colossal faces look so different from everything else the Olmec created? For the Olmec, these monuments clearly held deep cultural and political meaning. They were often placed in ceremonial plazas, facing outward as if guarding sacred spaces or marking the boundaries of royal power. At La Venta, one of the Olmec heartland's largest ceremonial centers, the heads were arranged along the site's central axis, aligned with other massive earthworks and buried mosaics made of jade. Archaeologists believe La Venta was a kind of capital city, home to a powerful elite who controlled trade routes stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to Central America. The heads may have represented those rulers, their portraits carved to project strength and divinity for eternity. But the mystery doesn't end with their creation. When Spanish colonists arrived in Mexico thousands of years later, they found local villagers uncovering these massive stones in the jungle. To the colonists, the idea that an ancient people could have built such monuments conflicted with biblical chronology, a worldview in which the Americas had no advanced civilizations before Christian contact. Missionaries and conquistadors considered the sculptures heretical relics, physical evidence that humanity's past was older and more complex than the Church allowed. Many of the earliest discoveries were deliberately destroyed. Some were broken apart and buried again, while others were ground down to make lime for construction. Reports from the 16th and 17th centuries describe Spanish friars ordering the demolition of idols of stone in the region, statues so large that local people refused to touch them, believing they were cursed. The result was centuries of silence. By the time modern archaeologists rediscovered the heads in the 1900s, they had already endured waves of destruction and erasure. Even today, their preservation remains a challenge. Several of the heads are still partially buried, their lower halves hidden by centuries of soil and vegetation. Excavations in the 1950s and 1960s revealed that many were intentionally buried in antiquity, as if the Olmec themselves wanted to conceal them. Whether this was done for ritual reasons or as part of the civilization's decline remains unknown. The forbidden nature of these artifacts isn't just about what they depict. It's also about what they represent. For a long time, the Olmec didn't fit neatly into Mesoamerica's historical framework. Their civilization rose and fell before the Maya and Aztec empires, yet it was more sophisticated than either in some respects. Early archaeologists struggled to accept that such advanced engineering and art could have existed in the Americas so early leading to decades of academic neglect. The Olmec were often referred to as a mother culture, the mysterious origin point from which later civilizations emerged, a phrase that still sparks debate today. Adding to the intrigue, traces of the Olmec's influence appear far beyond their homeland. Symbols, motifs, and religious imagery similar to theirs have been found across Central America, suggesting a network of cultural exchange that spanned thousands of miles. Jade masks, colossal altars, and smaller carved heads have turned up in unexpected places, as though pieces of their civilization were intentionally scattered to preserve its memory. The heads themselves remain silent, offering no inscriptions, no names, and no explanations. Without written records, scholars are left to interpret what the Olmec intended. Some argue the heads were created to commemorate victories or alliances. Others think they were funerary monuments for great leaders. There's even a theory that the helmets they wear were used to channel ritual energy, physical representations of the connection between man, earth, and the cosmos. Today, La Venta is a national park and open-air museum. Some of the heads have been relocated to nearby cities for protection, but others remain where they were found, half submerged in the jungle, slowly being reclaimed by nature. Researchers continue to study their chemical composition, their quarry origins, and the microscopic tool marks that shaped them. Yet the most fundamental questions remain unanswered. How were they moved? Who carved them? And why? In 1957, a small yellowed piece of parchment appeared on the antiquities market in Europe, and within a few years, it would ignite one of the biggest academic controversies in modern history. The artifact, barely larger than a notebook page, was simple at first glance. A medieval world map. But one detail set it apart from every other map of its era. A faintly outlined landmass on the western edge of the Atlantic Ocean. Place labeled Vinland. That single word changed everything. According to established history, Europeans didn't reach North America until 1492, when Christopher Columbus made landfall in the Caribbean. Yet this map, known today as the Vinland map, seemed to show the coastlines of Newfoundland and Labrador 5 centuries earlier. If authentic, it meant that medieval explorers had already crossed the Atlantic, mapped part of the New World, and returned to tell the tale long before Columbus set sail. When the map surfaced, its supposed origin story seemed convincing. It was said to have come from a private collection alongside an authentic 15th century manuscript known as the Tartar Relation, a Latin account of the Mongol Empire. The two documents were bound together, implying they shared a similar provenance. By the early 1960s, the map was acquired by Yale University, which announced the discovery with enormous fanfare. Yale's historians declared it the earliest known map to depict part of North America, drawn around 1440, roughly 50 years before Columbus. For a time, it looked like a discovery that would rewrite world history. The map's contours matched real geography far too closely to be coincidence. On the left edge, a large western island sat where Newfoundland should be. Across the Atlantic, Europe and Greenland were drawn with surprising accuracy. The depiction of Greenland as a separate landmass was especially odd. Medieval maps almost always showed it connected to Europe or Asia. How could a 15th century cartographer have known that Greenland was an island unless explorers had actually seen its coastlines? But not everyone was convinced. From the start, some scholars suspected the map might be too good to be true. The first doubts came from the ink. In 1972, Scientists at the University of London examined microscopic samples and found traces of titanium dioxide, a compound that didn't appear in inks until the 20th century. To many, that seemed like proof it was a forgery, an elaborate fake designed to fool collectors. The conclusion hit Yale hard, forcing the university to defend its prize artifact in the face of mounting criticism. Yet the story wasn't over. 2 decades later, new tests on the parchment itself told a very different story. Using radiocarbon dating, researchers determined the animal skin was indeed medieval, produced around 1434 AD, give or take a decade. If the parchment was genuinely that old, then whoever forged the map would have needed access to blank 15th century vellum, something exceedingly rare and expensive. That discovery reopened the debate. Was it possible the map was real, but the ink had been contaminated later during restoration? For the next half-century, the Vinland map sat at the center of a tug-of-war between historians and scientists. One side argued that it was an authentic record of pre-Columbian exploration, possibly linked to Norse voyages described in Icelandic sagas. The other side insisted it was a modern fake, created to exploit post-war fascination with ancient discoveries. Meanwhile, archaeology was offering its own evidence. In 1960, just a few years after the map's unveiling, explorers discovered a Norse settlement at Lance Aux Meadows in Newfoundland, physical proof that Viking explorers had reached North America around 1000 AD. The find matched details from the sagas, which described a fertile coastal land called Vinland. Suddenly, the idea of a medieval Vinland map didn't sound so far-fetched. But the ink controversy refused to go away. Every time new technology emerged, the map was retested, and the results only deepened the mystery. Some tests supported forgery claims, others supported authenticity. The titanium traces, once considered definitive evidence of modern manufacture, were later found in other supposedly genuine medieval manuscripts, suggesting contamination could happen naturally through storage or restoration. Through it all, Yale guarded the artifact closely. Access to the original was limited to a handful of experts, and all testing required university approval. Several researchers publicly complained about restrictions and non-disclosure agreements that prevented them from discussing their findings. The map wasn't just a scholarly puzzle anymore. It had become an institutional secret. By the early 2000s, most academic opinion leaned toward forgery. But then, in 2021, Yale quietly made a final announcement. After decades of analysis, they officially concluded that the Vinland map was a fake. According to their press release, advanced spectroscopy had detected modern pigments consistent with 20th century ink. The decision seemed final, yet the way it was handled only fueled more questions. Without any public debate, Yale removed the Vinland map from display. It had been one of the most popular items at the university's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library for nearly 60 years, drawing thousands of visitors. Now it was gone, replaced with a short statement and a few digital photos. That same year, several researchers revealed they had been bound by confidentiality agreements during the analysis, preventing them from discussing their work. Some claimed their raw data was withheld from publication. For a document that was supposedly debunked, it was an unusually secretive ending. The controversy might have faded if not for one final twist. Independent studies of the parchment's fibers suggested that it was produced in Northern Europe, possibly Iceland, using methods consistent with medieval scriptoria. If true, it could mean that a genuine map was later altered with modern ink, rather than entirely forged. To this day, there's no consensus. The parchment is real. The geography is accurate. The ink is modern. How all three facts coexist remains unexplained. So what if the Vinland map isn't simply real or fake, but something in between? An authentic medieval document retouched, recopied, or modified centuries later. Some researchers have suggested that the map could be a replica of an even older Norse chart, copied in the 15th century and later restored by a collector in modern times. Others think it may have been drawn from oral traditions of Viking voyages that persisted long after their expeditions ended. Whatever its true origin, the Vinland map forces us to confront a difficult question. How much of what we call discovery is simply rediscovery? If the Norse really did map North America centuries before Columbus, it means entire chapters of human history, journeys, trade routes, and cross-continental contact have been lost or ignored. It would also suggest that the so-called Age of Discovery wasn't the beginning of global exploration at all, but the continuation of something far older. Even now, few have seen the Vinland map in person. It's kept under strict preservation conditions, accessible only by request, and still surrounded by controversy. Whether it's a masterful forgery or the first glimpse of a forgotten mapmaker's hand, its impact on history is undeniable. In the far north of Western Australia, where red cliffs meet the monsoon rains, lies one of the most remote and mysterious cultural landscapes on Earth, the Kimberley region. Hidden among its gorges and plateaus are thousands of rock shelters, covered in ancient art, some of it dating back tens of thousands of years. But among all these paintings, one group of figures stands apart. Tall, white, and wide-eyed beings known as the Wandjina. These figures aren't forgotten relics. They're part of a living belief system that stretches back over 5,000 years. Archaeologists have dated the oldest Wandjina sites to around 3,800 BC, though Aboriginal oral traditions say they were painted long before that. During the Dreaming, the time when the world was formed, the Wandjina are said to be the great sky beings who descended from the clouds, bringing rain, life, and law to the land. When their work was finished, they returned to the heavens, leaving their likenesses on the rocks so that people would never forget them. The paintings themselves are unlike any other ancient art on Earth. The Wandjina are always depicted front-facing, with large, circular eyes, no mouths, and halos or crowns that radiate around their heads. They are often surrounded by lightning or cloud-like patterns, symbolizing their control over weather and water. While other Aboriginal art uses fine dotting and outlines, the Wandjina are painted in thick white pigment, sometimes spanning entire cave walls. The contrast against the red sandstone is striking. The figures seem to glow, as if emerging from the stone itself. To the Wurra, Ngurinian, and Wanambal peoples, who are the traditional custodians of this land, these images are not decorations or symbols. They are sacred presences. The Wandjina are believed to still watch over the land, bringing the rains and maintaining balance in the natural world. Each generation of elders continues to repaint them, following strict ceremonial laws to keep the images alive. The features never change, and the proportions are preserved exactly. The same Wandjina that looked out over the Kimberley thousands of years ago are still there today, protected by the hands of their descendants. Archaeologists studying the region were initially struck not just by the style of the Wandjina, but by their remarkable preservation. The pigments have survived for millennia in an environment that should have destroyed them long ago. Unlike most rock art, There are no signs of soot or weather damage. Scientists have found no evidence of binders or adhesives in the paint, yet the pigment bonds perfectly with the rock surface. Some suggest that the paint actually draws in and releases moisture from the sandstone, a kind of natural preservation process that's still not fully understood. But it's not just the chemistry that fascinates researchers. It's the mystery of how such a distinctive art style emerged and stayed unchanged for thousands of years. Most ancient art evolves over time, changing with generations and technologies. The Wandjina never did. Their consistency is absolute, their design unwavering. Anthropologists say it's almost unheard of in world history, a tradition this ancient surviving unbroken and unaltered. Despite the academic curiosity, access to the Wandjina sites is strictly controlled. For the Aboriginal custodians, the Wandjina are not artifacts to be studied. They are sacred beings. Many of the caves where the figures appear are off-limits to outsiders, and photography or filming is forbidden. Only a handful of researchers have ever been granted permission to visit the most sacred sites, and even then under supervision. Requests to conduct scanning or dating studies have been denied repeatedly. As the elders say, the knowledge of the Wandjina doesn't belong to science. It belongs to the land and the ancestors who first painted them. That protection has turned the Wandjina into something rare in the modern world, a true forbidden mystery. The figures are real, ancient, and still there, but few outside the local communities have ever seen them in person. Some of the most remote caves are so deep in the Kimberley that they can only be reached by helicopter or multi-day treks through crocodile-infested rivers. Even then, the exact locations are kept secret. Local elders have made it clear these beings are not meant to be disturbed. The strict laws around the sites go beyond physical access. In 2017, a public controversy erupted when a Sydney artist painted a Wandjina-inspired mural without permission. Aboriginal leaders called it deeply offensive, explaining that reproducing or reinterpreting the Wandjina outside their cultural context was forbidden. The mural was removed, and the incident served as a reminder. Even in modern Australia, the authority of the Wandjina remains absolute. For those few who have seen the real paintings, the experience is unforgettable. The caves are silent except for the drip of water. The air feels thick and heavy. The Wandjina figures, painted in white, seem to almost float off the walls, their black eyes fixed on whoever enters. Many visitors describe a sense of unease, as though being watched by something ancient and sentient. It's easy to understand why local people say these are living spirits, not just art. Scientists remain eager to learn more, not just about the Wandjina themselves, but about what they reveal regarding early human cognition and symbolic thought. The Kimberley is one of the oldest continuously inhabited regions on Earth, and the paintings could provide clues about how humans developed complex religious and social systems. But for now, that knowledge remains out of reach. The custodians continue to deny large-scale research projects, maintaining that these sacred sites are not laboratories, but places of worship. That refusal has only deepened the intrigue. Some researchers believe there may be older layers of art beneath the visible paintings, suggesting that the tradition could stretch back even further than currently dated. Others speculate that the caves themselves may contain artifacts or burial sites connected to the ceremonies that created the Wandjina. But unless permission is granted, those questions will never be answered. The mystery remains sealed, not by time, but by choice. Even so, what we do know about the Wandjina already challenges the boundaries of archaeology. Their distinctive faces, halos, and expressionless features have led to countless theories, some more grounded than others. Early explorers in the 1930s remarked on their resemblance to astronauts. Pale beings with large eyes, surrounded by what looks like helmets or glowing energy fields. To modern eyes, they appear strangely futuristic, yet to the Aboriginal people, there's nothing strange about them at all. The Wandjina are exactly what they've always been. The sky beings who brought life to the world. It's this combination of the real and the untouchable that makes the Wandjina so compelling. They're neither myth nor artifact, but something in between. Living images from a time before written history, preserved by people who still speak their names. And while these sky beings were painted into stone, another civilization on the other side of the world carved their likenesses into giants of basalt. In the southern plains of Iraq, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers carve through endless desert, lies one of the earliest cradles of civilization. Long before Babylon or Sumer rose from the sands, another culture flourished here, a people known today as the Ubaid. They built the first villages, cultivated the first crops, and left behind artifacts that still puzzle archaeologists to this day. Among those artifacts are a handful of small clay figures, unlike anything else in human history. Humanoid shapes with long, slender bodies, large almond-shaped eyes, and heads that look unmistakably reptilian. The Ubaid period predates the Sumerians by nearly 2,000 years, stretching back to around 5000 BC. It was during this time that the foundations of Mesopotamian society were first laid. Irrigation, pottery, trade, and organized religion all began here. The Ubaid people lived in mudbrick homes, practiced farming along the riverbanks, and built temples dedicated to early forms of the gods who would later dominate Sumerian mythology. Yet for all their influence on what came later, very little is actually known about them. There are no written records from the Ubaid era. Writing wouldn't emerge until much later. What we know comes entirely from the objects they left behind. In 1919, British archaeologists led by Henry Hall began excavations at a site called Tel el-Ubaid, not far from the ancient city of Ur. What they found seemed ordinary at first: pottery shards, tools, household items. But as they dug deeper, they unearthed a collection of small figurines made from clay, baked in primitive kilns. Most were only a few inches tall, but their design stopped the team in its tracks. These weren't the round, human-like fertility figures typical of early cultures. The Ubaid statues were tall and elongated, their limbs thin and angular, and their heads, long, smooth, and pointed, looked like those of reptiles. The more they found, the stranger the collection became. Some figures were male, others female. Several of the female statues were holding infants, cradling them in distinctly human maternal poses. Yet both mother and child had the same scaled reptilian features. Their eyes were large and slanted, their mouths tiny or absent, and their skin marked with patterns that resembled scales. Around their necks were necklaces or collars, and on their heads what looked like tight caps or even helmets. In every case, the craftsmanship was careful and deliberate. These weren't crude effigies made for ritual use. They were precise, consistent, and clearly meant to represent a specific being or species. At first, the statues were catalogued and stored with little fanfare. Archaeology in the early 20th century was still focused on biblical history and finds that didn't fit. the established narrative were often ignored. But as more of the Ubaid sites were excavated in the following decades, at Eridu, Uar, and Lagash, similar figurines began to appear. By the 1940s, enough examples had surfaced that researchers began to take notice. The problem was none of it made sense. There were no myths, inscriptions, or artistic traditions in later Mesopotamian culture that resembled these figures. The Sumerians, who succeeded the Ubaid, left extensive written records about their gods and heroes, but nowhere did they mention reptilian deities or beings. The closest parallel was the myth of the Anunnaki, a group of sky gods who descended to Earth, but even they were described as humanoid. The Ubaid statues seemed to belong to a different world entirely. Scholars have offered several theories over the years. Some suggest the figures might represent animal-human hybrids used in ritual symbolism, perhaps a forerunner to the zoomorphic gods that later appeared in Egypt and Mesopotamia. Others think they could be artistic exaggerations or ceremonial costumes worn by priests. But those explanations don't align with the detail of the carvings. The Ubaid figurines show no signs of clothing, and the reptilian features appear biological, not decorative. Whatever their purpose, they raise difficult questions. Why would a pre-Sumerian culture, with no known connection to reptiles in its mythology, devote so much effort to depicting beings like this? Were they symbolic or based on something or someone the Ubaid people believed they had actually seen? Adding to the mystery is how advanced the Ubaid were for their time. They built some of the earliest known temples in human history, raised platforms with complex layouts that foreshadowed the ziggurats of later Mesopotamia. Their society was organized, with evidence of class structure and trade networks reaching across the Persian Gulf. They were far from primitive. They were innovators. And yet, these statues suggest beliefs or experiences that don't fit neatly into any known cultural progression. Some researchers have pointed out that the statues' strange features, narrow faces, wide eyes, elongated skulls, resemble other anomalous depictions found across ancient cultures. From the Wandjina of Australia to the serpentine gods of Mesoamerica, serpent or reptile imagery appears repeatedly in ancient art. Whether that's coincidence or some shared symbolic archetype remains an open question. Unfortunately, further study of the Ubaid figures has become nearly impossible. Most of the original artifacts are kept in the Iraq National Museum in Baghdad, which was heavily looted during the 2003 invasion. While some of the statues have been recovered, others vanished entirely. The museum's archives remain closed to foreign researchers, and photographs of the figurines are scarce. Only a few black and white images taken before the 1980s survive, showing the statues in fragile condition behind glass. For now, their exact number and provenance are uncertain. This lack of access has given the Ubaid figures an almost forbidden status in archaeology. They're real, verified artifacts, not hoaxes or exaggerations. But the inability to study them further has turned them into one of the great lost puzzles of the ancient world. The few replicas that exist in European museums are based on incomplete records, making detailed analysis difficult. As of today, no comprehensive study of the Ubaid lizard figures has been published in over 40 years. Every attempt to revisit the topic runs into the same problem. No new data. The figurines are either lost, locked away, or too fragile to move. For modern researchers, they're like messages from an era that refuses to speak. Physical evidence without a story. For now, all we have are theories. Some believe they represent gods of fertility or transformation, combining human and animal traits to symbolize creation. Others see them as guardians or ancestral spirits tied to the earliest temples. A few, on the fringes of interpretation, suggest they might preserve memories of encounters with beings not of this earth, visitors who inspired the first myths of the gods. And until the museum doors reopen, the mystery of these ancient reptilian figures will remain sealed, just like the vaults and tombs they predate by thousands of years. If the Ubaid left us their reptilian gods, Japan's earliest artists may have sculpted their visitors wearing something else entirely. In the cool northern plains of Japan, long before the first samurai or the rise of any dynasty, a prehistoric people thrived for thousands of years. They were the Jaman, hunter-gatherers and early potters who lived across the islands for more than 10 millennia, from around 14,000 BC to 400 BC. They left no cities, no pyramids, and no written records. What they did leave behind, however, are some of the most unusual and advanced-looking artifacts ever discovered. Small clay figures known as dogu. At first glance, they look like typical prehistoric figurines. Squat, human-like shapes made from clay. But look closer, and they begin to seem almost futuristic. The dog have enormous, goggle-shaped eyes. Their heads are large and rounded, their torsos covered in patterns that look like mechanical seams or armor plating. Many appear to be wearing tight, segmented suits, complete with chest panels, belts, and jointed limbs. A few even seem to wear helmets with raised visors. For something made over 10,000 years ago, they look shockingly modern and eerily familiar. Archaeologists have uncovered over 18,000 dog across Japan, scattered from Hokkaido in the north to Kyushu in the south. Most are between 10 and 30 centimeters tall and were made from fired clay, a material that requires temperatures of over 800 degrees Celsius to harden properly. Some were found buried near hearths or inside storage pits, suggesting they held ceremonial importance. Others were discovered broken intentionally, as if part of ritual destruction. For the Jaman people, these figurines were clearly important. The craftsmanship is exceptional for their time. Each one is handmade, yet the proportions and symmetry are remarkably consistent. The eyes, in particular, are precise and deliberate. Many are shaped like horizontal almonds or ovals, but others, especially those from the later Kamigawa phase, feature the large, circular goggles that have made the dog famous. These are the ones that have earned them the nickname alien figurines. Archaeologists offer a simple explanation. The figures likely represented fertility or healing deities, similar to the Venus figurines found across Europe. Their exaggerated shapes, wide hips, large heads, and detailed patterns were symbols of life and rebirth. Some even suggest that the figures were used as sympathetic magic, where breaking the statue symbolically transferred illness or misfortune away from the owner. But that explanation doesn't fit all of them. Not every dog is female, and not everyone has exaggerated fertility traits. Many appear androgynous or even masculine, and the precision of their design seems to go beyond ritual use. Their smooth surfaces, uniform angles, and intricate incisions look more like something crafted from molds or templates than by hand. Modern 3D scans have shown that the patterns on certain dog display mathematical symmetry uncommon in prehistoric art. To some, this level of sophistication raises an uncomfortable question. Were the Jaman depicting something or someone they had actually seen? When the first dog were discovered in the late 19th century, Japanese scholars were baffled. They didn't resemble the art of any known ancient culture. In the decades that followed, as more were unearthed, comparisons began to surface. Their large, round eyes and helmet-like heads reminded some of modern pilots or divers. Others noticed how the segmented designs around their joints looked like flexible material, almost like pressure suits. A few even seemed to have tubes or vents carved into the sides of their heads. By the 1960s, when space exploration was capturing global imagination, the Dogu were drawn into a new theory, that they were depictions of ancient visitors from the stars. Authors like Eric von Daniken pointed to the Dogu as potential evidence of prehistoric contact with beings possessing advanced technology. To him and others, the resemblance to astronauts wasn't coincidence. It was a record, preserved in clay, of an encounter long forgotten. Mainstream archaeologists reject that idea, of course. They argue that the patterns are purely decorative, inspired by Jaman clothing or body painting. The helmets could be hairstyles or masks. The visors might be exaggerated eyes meant to convey spiritual power. But even among academics, there's agreement that the Dogu are unique. No other ancient culture produced art quite like it. Adding to the mystery is just how advanced the Jaman were for their time. They developed some of the earliest pottery in human history, intricately designed vessels with twisted rope patterns that gave the culture its name. Jaman literally means cord marked. They were skilled at working clay, bone, and wood, creating tools and ornaments of surprising complexity. Yet for all their craftsmanship, they never moved toward urbanization or empire. They remained a loosely connected network of communities who lived in harmony with their environment for more than 10,000 years. The Dogu, found in both large settlements and isolated sites, are among the only clues to their spiritual world. But the mystery of the Dogu doesn't end with their design. It continues in their restricted status. Most of the major Dogu finds are housed in Japanese museums, particularly the Tokyo National Museum and local institutions in Aomori and Hokkaido. However, the Japanese government classifies many of them as important cultural properties, meaning they cannot be exported, sold, or studied without permission. High-resolution images of certain Dogu are rarely released, and only replicas are allowed to travel overseas for exhibition. Some of the original figurines are even stored in climate-controlled vaults and shown to the public only occasionally. These limitations have given the Dogu a kind of forbidden aura. They are real, tangible artifacts, yet access to them is controlled so tightly that most people have only seen them through photographs. Researchers hoping to analyze their composition or production methods face years of approval processes. The government argues that the restrictions are necessary to prevent deterioration, but many see it as a reflection of cultural sensitivity. The Dogu are part of Japan's national identity, and their meaning isn't something to be dissected. That secrecy has only fueled public fascination. Replicas sell to collectors worldwide, and the Dogu frequently appear in Japanese pop culture, from anime and manga to museum advertising campaigns. Their unmistakable design, those big blank eyes and segmented suits, has become a symbol of mystery. Yet the originals remain largely out of sight, tucked away in carefully guarded collections across the country. Even among experts, there's disagreement about what exactly the Dogu were meant to represent. Some point out that the figures seem to have damage intentionally built into them, cracks or missing pieces that were part of their original design. Others note that they appear to be in specific poses, as if frozen mid-movement. Were they simply charms for fertility and protection? Or did they serve some more complex ceremonial function? A link between the physical world and something beyond? The truth is, we may never know. The Jaman people disappeared thousands of years before the written word reached Japan, leaving behind no text to explain their art. When they vanished, their beliefs went with them. All that remains are these silent, staring figures, each one handmade, each one unique, and each one whispering the same unanswered question. What were they trying to show us? In modern times, researchers continue to study them using non-invasive methods. Microscopic analysis of the clay has revealed that the Jaman used multiple firing stages, an advanced technique that would have made the figurines more durable and heat-resistant. Some dogu contain traces of pigments, suggesting they were once brightly colored. One particularly famous figure, the Shikoki dogu from Hokkaido, is believed to represent either a goddess or a shaman. Its large, rounded eyes, often compared to modern goggles, are perfectly symmetrical, carved with a precision rare in prehistoric art. Japan protects the dogu as national treasures, but it's their mystery that has made them truly priceless. The Jaman are gone, their stories forgotten, but their clay figures endure, part science, part legend, and part warning that some things in the past were never meant to be fully understood. But while Japan sealed away its ancient idols, another civilization, thousands of miles away, was drawing its own message, one so vast it could only be seen from the sky. In the dry highlands of southern Peru, where the Andes give way to the coastal desert, there lies a landscape unlike anywhere else on Earth. A barren plain etched with lines, spirals, and colossal figures stretching for miles in every direction. From the ground, they're nearly invisible. But from the air, they form one of the greatest ancient mysteries ever discovered, the Nazca Lines. Spread across more than 200 square miles, these geoglyphs, enormous designs carved into the desert surface, were created between 500 BC and 500 AD by the Nazca civilization, a people known for their sophisticated irrigation systems, colorful pottery, and mastery of desert survival. The sheer scale of their artwork defies comprehension. Hundreds of perfectly straight lines, some stretching over 10 miles long, intersect with intricate geometric shapes, animals, plants, and humanoid figures. Among them is one that stands apart from the rest, a single figure cut into the side of a rocky hill, unlike anything else in the desert. Locals call it El Astronauto, the astronaut. At first glance, the Nazca astronaut looks almost cartoonish, a humanoid form with a large round head, wide staring eyes, and one arm raised toward the sky. What's remarkable is its location. While most Nazca designs lie flat on the desert plain, the astronaut is carved high on the slope of a mountain, standing nearly 100 feet tall, positioned so that it looks down across the vast expanse of the Nazca Valley. From above, it's one of the clearest and most visible geoglyphs in the region. From the ground, however, it's barely discernible, distorted by the angle of the hillside and the shifting shadows of the desert sun. No one knows why the Nazca created it there, or what it was meant to represent. The rest of the Nazca lines, the spider, the hummingbird, the monkey, the condor, are all flat and stretched across the pampa, perfectly drawn on level ground. But this lone figure stands apart, seemingly placed to be seen not by people walking the desert, but by something or someone looking down from above. The discovery of the Nazca lines goes back to the 1920s, when Peruvian archaeologists began documenting strange shapes visible from nearby hills. But it wasn't until 1939, when an American pilot named Paul Kosak flew over the area, that their true scale became clear. From the air, the desert transformed into an enormous canvas of white lines on red earth, perfectly straight, geometrically precise, and seemingly endless. Kosak famously called it the world's largest astronomy book. The lines were made by a remarkably simple method. The Nazca people removed the thin layer of dark, oxidized stones that covered the desert surface, exposing the lighter sand underneath. Because the region receives almost no rain or wind, the exposed lines have remained visible for more than 1,500 years. Some are only a few inches deep, yet they've survived earthquakes, sandstorms, and time itself. Modern studies have shown that the Nazca carefully planned the designs using ropes and wooden stakes to maintain symmetry, evidence of a level of engineering skill far beyond what was expected from a pre-industrial culture. But why make them? That question has puzzled archaeologists for nearly a century. The most widely accepted theory is that the lines had astronomical significance. Many align with the rising and setting points of the sun, moon, and certain stars, suggesting they may have served as massive celestial calendars used for predicting the seasons. The animal figures could represent constellations or symbols tied to agricultural cycles, guides for when to plant and harvest in a desert environment where rainfall was unpredictable. Another theory sees the lines as ritual pathways, sacred routes walked during ceremonies to honor the gods, especially those connected to water and fertility. Archaeologists have found small altars and pottery fragments along some of the lines, indicating offerings and rituals may have taken place. The Nazca depended entirely on underground aquifers for survival, and their art often focused on themes of water, fertility, and the balance between the earth and sky. Then there's the third theory, the one that's made the Nazca lines famous far beyond the world of archaeology. In the 1960s, researchers began to suggest that the lines might not have been meant for humans at all. The enormous scale of the figures and the precision of their geometry seemed unnecessary if they were only for earthly rituals. From the ground, they're almost impossible to see in their entirety. But from above, they're perfectly clear. Some began to speculate that the Nazca may have been trying to communicate with the sky, using the desert itself as a message board to the gods, or perhaps something even more literal. The Nazca astronaut became the centerpiece of that theory. With its round head, large eyes, and upraised hand, it looked to many like a figure in a helmet waving to the heavens. Erich von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods popularized the idea that the geoglyphs were landing markers or signals for ancient visitors, messages carved into the earth for beings who arrived from the stars. Most scientists dismiss this as pseudoscience, pointing out that there's no evidence of flight or contact in Nazca culture. But even so, the Nazca lines continue to resist simple explanation. The combination of mathematical precision, astronomical alignment, and enormous scale makes them one of the greatest unsolved achievements of the ancient world. Over the decades, researchers have mapped more than 800 lines, 300 geometric figures, and 70 animal and plant designs. Many overlap, with older lines buried beneath newer ones, evidence that the tradition lasted for centuries. New imaging technology continues to reveal shapes no one had seen before, including humanoid forms, birds, and strange abstract patterns. Despite these discoveries, the Nazca astronaut remains the most striking. Its high placement and unique design make it the outlier and perhaps the key to understanding the others. In recent years, the Nazca lines have faced a new kind of danger. Environmental changes, tourism, and vandalism have all taken their toll. In 2014, activists walking across the desert near the hummingbird geoglyph left footprints that damaged the surface. The Peruvian government, alarmed by the fragility of the site, imposed strict protections. The Nazca region was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and private aerial flights over the area were banned. Only approved research teams and official tourism companies can photograph the lines from the air. High-resolution images are restricted, and foreign projects require state authorization. These restrictions are meant to protect the site, but they've also added to its forbidden reputation. The Nazca lines are one of the few places on Earth where you can stand within touching distance of a global mystery but aren't allowed to fully explore it. Even drone photography is prohibited. Researchers who attempt unauthorized overflights risk heavy fines or expulsion from the country. As a result, the best views of the Nazca lines remain tightly controlled, visible only from government-approved observation towers or sanctioned aircraft. Yet the fascination never fades. Scientists continue to study the area using satellite imagery and LiDAR, searching for patterns hidden beneath the desert crust. Each new discovery deepens the enigma. In 2019, Japanese archaeologists using artificial intelligence identified 142 new geoglyphs, some depicting creatures no one had ever seen before. Strange hybrids of animals and humans, spirals, and geometric mazes. How many more lie buried under the sand is anyone's guess. From messages etched in desert plains to maps that shouldn't exist, the next artifact redrew the world before it was discovered. Deep in the humid jungles of southeastern Ecuador, near the border with Peru, a vast cave system stretches beneath the earth. It's known as Cueva de los Tellos, the Cave of the Oilbirds, a natural labyrinth of tunnels, chambers, and underground rivers hidden beneath the Andean foothills. For centuries, local Chuar and Achuar people have told stories of strange lights, metallic sounds, and vast chambers carved into the rock. But in the 1960s, those legends collided with modern exploration, and what followed would become one of the most controversial archaeological mysteries in South America. The story of the Metal Library of Ecuador. The caves themselves are real and enormous. Geologists who surveyed the region in the 1960s confirmed that the Tello system runs for miles underground, with some passages measuring over 200 feet high and 300 feet wide. Unlike most caves, which form from limestone erosion, these tunnels cut through solid metamorphic rock, their walls unnaturally smooth and sharply angled. Some explorers noted that parts of the cave looked almost artificial, as though the stone had been cut by tools or machines. Something was down there. No one knew what. By the mid-1970s, curiosity reached its peak. In 1976, one of the most ambitious expeditions in South American history set out to explore the caves. Organized by the British and Ecuadorian governments, it involved over 100 people, including soldiers, engineers, geologists, and even astronauts. Among them was Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon. His presence gave the mission global attention. If Armstrong was going underground, there had to be something worth finding. Officially, the 1976 expedition was described as a scientific survey aimed at mapping the cave system and studying its geology. But its scale and secrecy suggested there was more to it. Helicopters ferried equipment into the jungle. The Ecuadorian military provided guards. Teams spent weeks underground, some venturing into areas that had never been mapped. Morich, the man whose discovery started it all, was not invited to join. When the expedition ended, the official report stated that no metal library or man-made structures had been found, only natural formations and small archaeological remains belonging to the Shure people. Yet the details of what happened below ground remain murky. Several participants later described seeing chambers that appeared cut into perfect right angles, with walls so smooth they reflected light. Others claimed that parts of the cave were sealed off or deemed inaccessible for reasons never explained. Over the decades, the story of the metal library refused to die. In the 1990s, local Shure elders confirmed that the caves were sacred and that outsiders had indeed been shown certain chambers, but not the deepest ones. According to their tradition, the lower levels of the cave system are taboo, inhabited by Arudam, the guardian spirits of their ancestors. Only shamans are allowed to approach them, and even then only after lengthy purification rituals. The elders denied that the metal library existed in the literal sense, but admitted that something ancient was hidden there, something not meant for all eyes. Modern geologists have since re-examined the caves and agree that while the formations are natural, some areas do look unusually engineered. The floors are flat and polished, the walls feature symmetrical ridges, and some chambers appear to have been enlarged by human hands. Whether this was the work of ancient inhabitants or simply the product of erosion and mineral flow remains uncertain. Attempts to launch new expeditions have faced significant political obstacles. The Ecuadorian government has classified the Tayos region as an area of cultural and environmental protection. All exploration now requires approval from both the Ministry of Culture and the Shure Federation, and foreign permits are almost impossible to obtain. Officially, this is to respect indigenous sovereignty and preserve the ecosystem. Unofficially, it's created an impenetrable wall of bureaucracy that has kept the caves off limits to serious study for nearly 50 years. Those who try to organize private expeditions often encounter unexplained resistance. Requests are denied without explanation, and permits are delayed indefinitely. In 2015, a European team attempting to recreate the 1976 expedition was stopped by local authorities after arriving in Ecuador, their equipment confiscated. A spokesperson said the group lacked cultural authorization to enter sacred ground. Meanwhile, rumors persist that the Ecuadorian military still maintains a quiet presence in the region. Locals occasionally report helicopters landing near the main entrance at night, though no official operations are recorded. Some believe the original expedition did find something significant, perhaps not a library but ancient tunnels or artifacts, and that those findings were sealed away. The forbidden aura surrounding Taos has only grown stronger in recent years. Despite advances in ground-penetrating radar, satellite imaging, and 3D mapping, the caves remain one of the least explored subterranean systems in the Americas. What little data exists comes from independent researchers, many of whom rely on outdated maps and hand-drawn diagrams from the 1970s. Photographs from inside the cave are rare, and some of the best-known images have mysteriously vanished from public archives. Even among scientists, opinion is divided. Some see the metal library as pure legend, a story born from misunderstanding and amplified by fame. Others point to the physical evidence, the scale of the cave system, the perfect geometry of some chambers, and the lack of any thorough modern investigation. For them, the mystery remains unresolved, not because it's been debunked, but because it's been buried under layers of restriction. Whether the metal library exists or not, one fact is undeniable. The Taos caves hold secrets that no one is allowed to uncover. The mix of legend, geopolitics, and restricted access has turned them into one of the most enduring forbidden zones in modern archaeology. From the jungles of Ecuador to the vaults of India, the pattern repeats. Sacred sites sealed by faith, politics, or fear. And if the secrets of the underworld are locked beneath Ecuador, India's temples may hold something even older. Flying machines carved in stone. Across India, ancient temples and sacred texts describe a world where gods and heroes didn't just walk or ride. They flew. They soared across the sky in gleaming chariots of fire, maneuvered through the clouds, and battled among the stars. To most historians, these are poetic metaphors, the imagination of storytellers capturing cosmic power in mythic form. But buried within these legends are details so specific, so strangely technical, that they've led some researchers to wonder, were these chariots of the gods more than stories? Could they have been machines? These vehicles are known in Sanskrit as vimanas, a word that roughly translates to measured out or constructed vehicle. They appear throughout India's oldest writings, from the Rig Veda and Mahabharata to later epics and commentaries, always described as flying craft used by gods, demigods, or kings favored by them. In some passages, vimanas are vast floating cities. In others, they're single-person aircraft shaped like spheres, pyramids, or discs. The descriptions vary, but one thing is constant. They move through the air, emit light, and operate with a kind of controlled power that sounds less mythical than mechanical. The Mahabharata, one of the world's oldest epics, written thousands of years before the Common Era, contains verses that describe aerial battles between these flying machines. In one section, the hero Arjuna rides in a vimana that shone like fire and moved as swift as thought. In another, vimanas fire weapons that cause a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe, blinding light and destructive winds. Language that modern readers can't help but compare to explosions or energy weapons. The Ramayana, too, describes vimanas in detail. The god Ravana, ruler of Lanka, flies a magnificent chariot called Pushpaka Vimana, capable of carrying many passengers and traveling at great speed. The text even states that it could move at the will of its owner. A self-controlled flying craft, thousands of years before the concept of flight entered human technology. For centuries, scholars viewed these descriptions as allegorical, symbolic depictions of divine power. But in the early 20th century, something changed. In 1918, a text surfaced called the Vimanika Shastra, said to be a Sanskrit manual describing how vimanas were built and operated. It was allegedly dictated by a mystic named Subbaraya Shastri, who claimed he had received the information telepathically from ancient sages. The document, later translated into English, described several types of vimanas, complete with diagrams, construction materials, and operating principles. According to the Vimanika Shastra, vimanas used a form of energy that modern readers would recognize as electricity or magnetism, even mercury-based propulsion. The text mentions heated mercury producing a driving force that allowed the craft to ascend and move through the air. It describes circuits, metals with specific conductivity, and even aerodynamic concepts such as drag and lift. It reads, at times, like an engineer's notebook rather than a spiritual allegory. Mainstream historians dismiss the text as a modern creation, pointing out that its Sanskrit style is more recent than the ancient Vedic language. Yet the scientific details, even if misinterpreted, have intrigued researchers. Mercury propulsion is not pure fantasy. The element has long been studied for its magnetic and plasma properties, and modern experiments have explored its potential in electric propulsion systems. Ancient Indian temples seem to echo the same fascination with flight. At sites like Ellora, Ajunta, and Khajuraho, carvings depict beings surrounded by circular or conical shapes, sitting inside ornate capsules. In the Kailasa temple at Ellora, one of the largest rock-cut structures in the world, murals and reliefs show gods descending in vehicles that bear uncanny resemblance to modern rockets or domed craft. The depictions are open to interpretation, but their combination of geometry and motion stands apart from other temple art. In Konark, the 13th century Sun Temple is carved with wheel motifs so precise they function as sundials, measuring time to the minute. Its builders clearly understood mechanics and solar alignment, raising the question, how much older was this knowledge and where did it come from? The possibility that some of India's ancient knowledge encoded advanced science isn't as outlandish as it once sounded. The Vedas include references to atomic principles and cosmic cycles measured in billions of years. Concepts modern physics only began to grasp in the 20th century. The Samarangana Sutradhara, a 10th century engineering treatise, even includes sections describing machines that fly and automata that move by themselves. In the 1970s, a team of Indian scientists at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore attempted to analyze the Vaimanika Shastra's technical claims. Their report concluded that while the designs described in the text were not aerodynamically sound by modern standards, the level of conceptual understanding was surprisingly advanced for an era supposedly unaware of flight. One researcher commented that whoever wrote it had an intuitive grasp of mechanical design, even if not formal knowledge of engineering. Beyond the texts, the fascination with Vimanas has endured because it connects myth and material culture. India's ancient architecture often integrates cosmic symbolism and mechanical precision. Many temples are built on precise alignments with constellations, their layouts forming geometric mandalas that mirror the stars. At Ajunta, the cave temple's orientation allows sunlight to fall on specific statues only during equinoxes, an astronomical feat requiring generations of observation. To believers in ancient technology, the connection is clear. The same civilization that tracked the heavens so precisely could have engineered something greater. Machines that bridge the gap between earth and sky. The Vimanas are also linked to legends of catastrophic wars, the so-called Mahabharata War, which some alternative historians claim could describe a prehistoric conflict involving weapons of immense power. Passages describing blinding flashes, searing heat, and cities turned to ash have been compared to eyewitness accounts of nuclear detonations. Though most archaeologists reject this theory, the fact that such imagery exists in texts thousands of years old continues to intrigue readers. Adding to the mystery is the forbidden element surrounding India's most sacred sites. The Archaeological Survey of India, ASI, the agency responsible for protecting cultural monuments, strictly limits research on certain ancient temples. Requests to conduct 3D scans or ground-penetrating radar inside temples like Ellora and Kailasa have repeatedly been denied, officially to preserve structural stability. But some suspect another reason that such scans might reveal hidden chambers, foundations, or relics that could fuel controversial interpretations. In 2018, A proposal to scan beneath the Ellora caves was halted despite international funding. The ASI cited religious sensitivity, noting that the site remains an active place of worship. Similarly, access to the subterranean areas of the Sun Temple at Konark has been blocked for decades, allegedly because of structural weakness, though many suspect treasures or relics are sealed within. Whether these decisions are purely logistical or driven by fear of discovery, the effect is the same. India's oldest engineering marvels remain partly unexplored. Even within the country, scholars who study Vimanas tread carefully. Academic institutions often avoid the topic, wary of being associated with fringe theories. Yet small research groups continue to explore parallels between ancient Sanskrit descriptions and modern aerospace concepts. Some of India's engineers, inspired by the old texts, have even built models based on Vimana blueprints, testing them in wind tunnels. A few designs achieved lift and stability, though not flight. Others demonstrated features resembling modern propulsion ideas. Rotating engines, layered hulls, and magnetic cores. The truth may never be known. The temples that might hold answers remain sealed, and the texts that describe the Vimanas straddle the line between scripture and science. Yet the consistency of these stories, across centuries and regions, hints at something remarkable. Whether born of observation, imagination, or memory, they show that thousands of years ago, humanity was already looking upward, wondering what it might take to join the gods in flight. And while India's temples hint at flight, Europe's monasteries hid their own proof, painted centuries before the Wright brothers, that has puzzled historians, theologians, and art experts for decades. The Vaznika Monastery, founded in the 14th century, is home to one of the oldest collections of religious texts in southeastern Europe. Centuries of hand-copied Bibles, papal letters, and illuminated manuscripts preserved through wars and empires. But among them, one stands out. It contains a depiction of the crucifixion unlike any other. Above Christ's cross, in the painted sky, are two strange objects that don't belong. Small, metallic-looking vessels with glowing edges and figures inside them. To anyone familiar with Christian art, the rest of the scene looks ordinary. Christ hangs between two thieves. Below him, Mary and John kneel in grief. But above the clouds, flanking the cross on both sides, are what appear to be flying craft. Dome-shaped, each emitting streaks of light. Within them, two small human-like figures seem to be looking down, watching the crucifixion unfold. The detail is unmistakable, even though the painting itself is only a few inches wide. This image, known as the Vaznika Monastery seal or sometimes simply the Vaznika crucifixion, is believed to date back to the 1400s, a time when Bosnia lay on the frontier between East and West, between Catholicism and Orthodoxy, faith and superstition. The painting was done in the style of a medieval illumination. Gold leaf backgrounds, vibrant reds and blues, and miniature angels rendered in exquisite detail. Yet these two flying shapes are nothing like angels. Their forms are mechanical, symmetrical, and unlike anything else in the period's art. The mystery isn't unique to Bosnia. Similar motifs appear across Europe during the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance, most famously in the Crucifixion of Christ fresco at the Visoki Dikani Monastery in Kosovo, painted around the same era. There too, on either side of the cross, two disc-like objects soar across the sky, each with a pilot visible inside. Art historians typically call these sun and moon personifications, symbols representing the passage of time or divine presence. But the visual similarity to flying craft is undeniable. The Vaznica image stands apart because of its precision. Unlike symbolic halos or clouds, these shapes are solid, metallic, and sharply defined. One even features what looks like an exhaust trail, a stream of light or fire trailing behind it. For centuries, this detail went largely unnoticed. The manuscript itself was locked away in the monastery's collection, seen only by scholars cataloging old religious texts. It wasn't until the late 20th century that the image surfaced publicly, when photographs of the Vaznica archives were published in a small monograph about Balkan Christian art. The images sparked immediate debate. What exactly were the artists trying to show? The Franciscan friars of Vaznica maintain that the objects are allegorical, artistic representations of heaven's light or celestial guardians. According to this interpretation, the figures inside the spheres are angels, their glowing trails symbolizing divine presence rather than flight. But skeptics point out that there's no precedent for this design in other Christian works of the same period. If they were angels, why enclose them in spherical metallic forms? Why make them look so mechanical? Throughout the Renaissance, artists often embedded strange or symbolic imagery into religious scenes, drawing inspiration from biblical visions. The book of Ezekiel's description of wheels within wheels, luminous spinning machines attended by winged beings, influenced generations of painters. Some scholars think the Vaznica depiction could be a visual echo of that imagery. But others argue that these shapes with their pilots and directional movement feel too literal to be metaphor. Comparisons have been drawn to other examples from Italy and Eastern Europe. The Madonna and Child with the infant St. John, painted in the 15th century and displayed in Florence's Palazzo Vecchio, features a small object hovering in the sky behind the Virgin Mary. It's spherical, metallic, and surrounded by rays. Beneath it, a shepherd shields his eyes, looking upward as though witnessing something extraordinary. In another piece, The Baptism of Christ by Eric de Gelder, 1710, a radiant circular object shines above Christ's head, sending beams of light downward. To some, these are artistic symbols of divinity. To others, they are visual records of something unexplained. Perhaps even sightings of unidentified aerial phenomena centuries before the modern era. The Vaznica crucifixion fits squarely into that tradition. But what makes it so compelling is its isolation. Bosnia in the 15th century was far removed from the artistic centers of Italy or France. There was no reason for a local monk to include mechanical, metallic imagery. In his devotional art, the Franciscan order emphasized simplicity, faith, and strict adherence to iconographic tradition. This kind of deviation was not typical. The forbidden nature of the image adds another layer to its intrigue. The manuscript has never been exhibited publicly. The Vatican's archival authorities now oversee its preservation, and it remains housed within the Vaznica Monastery's restricted collection. Scholars can only view it by special permission, and photography is prohibited. The few known images of the page come from microfilm copies made decades ago, which circulate quietly among researchers of religious symbolism. Attempts by foreign museums to borrow or reproduce the manuscript have been denied, citing its fragility and sacred value. The restrictions have turned the Vaznica seal into one of Europe's least accessible artifacts of Christian art. Even within Bosnia, few have seen it firsthand. For those who have, the experience is startling. The craftsmanship is exquisite, and the mysterious shapes dominate the tiny page with unexpected realism. Skeptics argue that these interpretations stretch the imagination too far. In their view, the Vaznica image, like the others of its kind, simply reflects medieval cosmology. To a 15th century artist, the sun and moon were not abstract bodies, but divine symbols. The crafts could represent those celestial orbs rendered in human form. The figures inside would then be personifications of day and night, common motifs in Christian iconography. But even so, this doesn't fully explain the distinctly mechanical look of the objects. Why depict celestial symbols as enclosed, metallic pods? There's also the question of influence. Some art historians suggest the imagery might have come from older Byzantine manuscripts, where celestial beings were sometimes shown inside mandorlas, almond-shaped frames of light. If that's true, the Vaznica artist may have borrowed the motif without understanding its original meaning. Still, others insist the resemblance to modern depictions of aircraft is too strong to ignore. The domed shapes, directional lines, and light trails appear deliberate, not accidental. What's most intriguing is how consistent this imagery is across distant regions and eras. From the Italian Renaissance to Eastern Orthodoxy, similar flying spheres appear again and again in sacred art. Always hovering in the sky, always connected to divine events. Whether symbolic or literal, they suggest that people throughout history saw something in the heavens that left a lasting impression. Whatever the truth, the Vaznica seal stands as one of Europe's strangest artistic relics, an image that blurs the boundary between heaven and machine, between belief and observation. It's a reminder that history's most enduring mysteries aren't always hidden in caves or buried under ruins. Sometimes they sit quietly on a page, waiting to be noticed. If the heavens were once painted with machines, China's mountains may still hide the records of those who came from them. High in the mountains of the Chinese-Tibetan borderlands lies a stretch of desolate terrain few outsiders have ever seen. Wind-carved plateaus, icy valleys, and cliffs that vanish into fog. It's a place where legend and geography have long overlapped, where the air is thin and stories linger. Among those stories is one of the most controversial discoveries ever claimed in Asian archaeology. A find that, if true, would rewrite not just Chinese history but human history itself. It's the mystery of the Dropa stones, an alleged collection of engraved discs said to tell the story of visitors from the stars who crash-landed on Earth thousands of years ago. The account begins in 1938, when a Chinese archaeologist named Qipu Ti reportedly led an expedition into a remote region of the Biancarola Mountains, near the border between Tibet and Sichuan. According to the story, the team was exploring a network of high-altitude caves used by nomadic herders when they stumbled upon something extraordinary. Inside one of the chambers were hundreds of skeletons. Small, thin, and unlike any known local people. Lying among them were stone discs, each about a foot across, carved with spiral grooves that ran from the outer edge toward a central hole, much like a phonograph record. The expedition allegedly recovered 716 of these discs, later dubbed the Dropa stones. When examined, they were said to contain microscopic carvings of strange symbols, not pictographs or Chinese characters, but something entirely unknown. Qipu Ti and his team brought several back to Beijing for study, though few records of the discovery ever surfaced in official channels. For years, the stones were said to have been stored in a university collection, ignored by most scholars who dismissed the discovery as local folklore. It wasn't until the early 1960s that the story re-emerged thanks to a Chinese researcher named Dr. Tsum Umui. Working from rubbings and photographs of the discs, he claimed to have deciphered the spirals, not as decorative patterns, but as writing. His translation, later reprinted in Russian scientific journals, described something astonishing, a chronicle of beings from another world. According to his interpretation, the inscriptions told of a group of travelers who came from a crash-landed in the Bayan Kerala region around 12,000 years ago and took refuge in the caves. The text said the visitors, called the Dropa, could not repair their ship and were stranded on Earth. Over time, they were shunned by the local tribes because of their unusual appearance, large heads, small bodies, and weak frames. Eventually, they integrated with the mountain people and died there, leaving behind their discs as a record of their origin. Dr. Tsum's translation included haunting lines. The Dropa came down from the clouds in their craft. The men, women, and children hid in the caves until the rising sun revealed that we meant no harm. The claim was explosive. Yet, just as quickly as it appeared, it was dismissed. Chinese authorities denied that any such expedition or translation had taken place. Dr. Tsum's name vanished from official academic listings, and no copies of his research could be found in university archives. Those who tried to track him down discovered that the Beijing Academy of Sciences, where he was said to have worked, had no record of his employment. Despite this, the story persisted. In 1962, Russian journalist Alexander Kazantsev published an article in the Sputnik magazine, repeating the account and calling the Dropa stones evidence of prehistoric contact between humans and extraterrestrials. His article included detailed descriptions of the discs, and even claimed that several emitted faint electrical charges when tested, suggesting the presence of metal traces or magnetized minerals. Soviet scientists reportedly analyzed one of the stones and found a high concentration of cobalt and other metals that would have required advanced smelting technology to produce. Other accounts from the 1970s expanded on the mystery. Photographs of circular stone discs with central holes began appearing in Western magazines, often attributed to museum collections in China. Some were shown with visible spiral carvings, though their authenticity remains disputed. A few researchers claimed that when the discs were spun on their axes, they emitted a faint humming or vibrating sound. One Chinese technician supposedly found traces of radioactivity on their surface. Whether these stories were genuine reports or sensational embellishments, they helped turn the Dropa stones from an obscure rumor into one of the great enduring legends of forbidden archaeology. Attempts to verify the story have gone nowhere. After China's Cultural Revolution in the 1960s, most records from early archaeological expeditions were lost or destroyed. The caves of Bayankura Ula are real. They're part of a vast plateau filled with karst formations and natural tunnels. But no official excavation has ever documented stone discs like the ones described. Western journalists who attempted to reach the area in the 1980s and 1990s found it nearly impossible. Travel to the region was restricted by the Chinese government due to its proximity to sensitive border zones and its importance to Tibetan culture. Even today, foreign researchers require multiple permits to visit, and independent exploration is strictly forbidden. A handful of objects that resemble the Dropa stones have surfaced in Chinese collections, but none have been conclusively linked to the original story. Some appear to be by discs, traditional Neolithic artifacts used in ancient Chinese burial rites, which share a similar circular shape but lack inscriptions or spirals. Others show clear signs of modern tooling, suggesting they may be fakes created to capitalize on the myth. Nevertheless, a few pieces of evidence continue to keep the debate alive. A 1974 photograph published by the Austrian journalist Ernst Wiegerer shows two circular stone discs with spiral patterns displayed at the Banpo Museum in Xi'an. Wiegerer claimed that museum staff told him they were the same stones described in the Dropa story, though they were later removed from display and never seen again. When he returned a few years later, the museum denied ever having possessed such artifacts. That disappearance, like so many parts of this mystery, has only fueled further speculation. Some believe that the stones, if real, were confiscated by Chinese authorities to prevent public fascination with anything resembling ancient alien theories. Others argue that the entire tale was a Cold War fabrication, a mix of mistranslation and rumor that spread from Soviet writers eager to undermine Western views of history. Yet even skeptics admit that there is a kernel of truth in the geography and the timing. The caves exist, the story appeared in multiple languages over decades, and at least some artifacts resembling the description have been documented. The forbidden nature of the Dropa stones lies not just in their mystery, but in their denial. The Chinese government maintains that no expedition led by Chi Pudiai ever occurred, and no official record of 716 stone discs exists. The very mention of the Dropa story in Chinese media is met with censorship or ridicule. Academics who've attempted to research it find their inquiries quietly redirected or ignored. In the realm of archaeology, it's as though the entire event has been erased, not disproven, just unacknowledged. That silence leaves a strange vacuum. Were the Dropa stones an elaborate hoax, an echo of humanity's fascination with the stars projected onto an ancient legend? Or did something truly unusual happen in those mountains? Until someone gains access to Bayankara Ula and documents the caves firsthand, the answer will remain locked away, hidden beneath the same layers of secrecy that cover much of China's early archaeology. China denies the stones ever existed, but Egypt's own archives mention technologies just as impossible. In the early 1900s, when Egyptology was still a young and feverish discipline, a series of papyrus fragments surfaced in Cairo that caused quiet unease among the scholars who saw them. They weren't religious texts or funerary guides like the Book of the Dead, nor were they medical or administrative scrolls. They appeared to be something entirely different. Notes, perhaps, from a lost treatise on engineering. Written in faded hieratic script, the fragments described an unknown practice involving sound, vibration, and the movement of stone. The discovery was brief, the fragments were catalogued without fanfare, and then, within a few decades, they vanished. What little remains of their record comes from passing references in letters and museum reports written before the 1930s, referring to them only as the Cairo Codex. The fragments were reportedly uncovered during an excavation near Saqqara around 1902, when workers clearing debris from a collapsed chamber found a sealed jar containing brittle scrolls. They were turned over to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, where they were inventoried among hundreds of other finds. Several British and French archaeologists based in the city mention them in correspondence. Short notes describing a set of papyri containing curious references to sound and stonework. The descriptions were vague, but one line reappeared across multiple letters. The resonance of stone harnessed for lifting. That phrase has fascinated researchers ever since. Egypt's monuments, particularly its massive temples and pyramids, have long inspired questions about how ancient builders moved such enormous blocks with limited tools. The Great Pyramid alone contains more than 2 million limestone and granite blocks, some weighing over 70 tons. Traditional explanations rely on sleds, ramps, and manpower, but physical experiments have never convincingly reproduced the process on the same scale. If the Cairo Codex was genuine, it might have contained an alternative clue, an understanding of acoustic or vibrational technology long since forgotten. The concept isn't entirely alien to Egypt. Across the country's ancient sites, from Karnak to Dendra, acoustic phenomena appear again and again. The hypostyle hall at Karnak, with its 134 massive stone columns, is known for its echoing properties. When sound reverberates through the hall, the effect is overwhelming, as if the structure itself is amplifying the voice of the gods. In Dendra's Temple of Hathor, hieroglyphs show musicians and priests performing rituals with sistrums and drums while surrounded by coiling symbols of energy. Ancient Egyptian texts also mention the use of Heka, a form of sacred knowledge that combines spoken word, vibration, and willpower to achieve physical results. If those ideas were ever written down as practical instructions, they may have formed the basis of what later became known as the Cairo Codex. One particularly intriguing connection comes from a paper presented in 1921 by archaeologist Frederick Blythe at the British School of Archaeology in Egypt. Blythe cited a fragmentary document he had seen in Cairo referencing the harmonics of stone chambers and voices that move the pillars. He wrote that the language was metaphorical, possibly describing religious chant, but noted that it contained unusual notations, sequences of numbers and symbols that didn't correspond to known Egyptian scripts. The document, he said, was held in a restricted section of the museum and not considered of major historical interest. Within a few years, Blythe's reference disappeared from subsequent editions of his work. By the 1930s, all mention of the fragments had vanished from museum catalogs. Several of the Cairo Museum's older acquisitions were reclassified as unverified, including the papyri supposedly found at Saqqara. When scholars tried to locate them in the 1950s, they were told that the items had been lost during renovations or moved to storage. No one could confirm exactly when or how they disappeared. The only physical evidence that the Cairo Codex ever existed comes from early photographs of similar papyri. Grainy black and white images showing columns of faded text accompanied by small diagrams, one of which appears to show a curved horn or trumpet-like shape. These fragments became part of a wider debate about whether the ancient Egyptians might have possessed a deeper understanding of sound than we realize. Modern acoustic research at sites like Karnak and Abydos has revealed deliberate tuning of stone chambers. Certain frequencies create standing waves that resonate through the walls, amplifying low tones and causing vibrations strong enough to be felt in the body. Archaeologists have found niches and hollows carved into temple walls that seem designed to enhance resonance. It's possible that these effects were used to heighten religious experiences, but some believe they had a practical purpose as well. Several independent researchers have suggested that ancient builders could have exploited these vibrations to reduce the apparent weight of stone during transport or placement. The idea, while speculative, is supported by scattered ancient references to songs that move mountains and voices that lift the stone. The Cairo Codex, if real, might have been the first written evidence linking those myths to a physical technique. What makes the story so compelling is how abruptly it ends. After the museum's reclassification, The papyri were never mentioned again in official reports. In the 1970s, when Egypt reopened many of its archives to foreign researchers, inquiries about the codex were either ignored or dismissed. One curator reportedly told a visiting academic that no such document ever existed. Yet internal inventories released in the 1990s show a gap in the numbering sequence for Saqqara finds from 1902, suggesting that at least one registered item was removed or lost. Some historians think the fragments may have been deliberately deaccessioned during Egypt's period of nationalist reform in the 1950s, when artifacts linked to colonial excavations were quietly erased from official records. Others believe the papyri may have degraded beyond recovery and were simply destroyed. But a more controversial idea persists, that the codex was suppressed because its contents were too unconventional, too easy to misinterpret. Egypt has long struggled with fringe claims about lost technologies and alien intervention, and the government's strict control over its antiquities is partly designed to prevent such narratives from spreading. Whatever the reason, the result is the same. The Cairo Codex has become a ghost in the museum's history, existing only in second-hand descriptions and a few disputed photographs. Even so, the idea that the ancient Egyptians understood sound in a practical, perhaps even technological way, continues to draw attention. Modern experiments have shown that acoustic levitation, using sound waves to move small objects, is scientifically possible. High-frequency vibrations can create pockets of pressure that counteract gravity, suspending objects in midair. While such experiments operate on a tiny scale, they prove that sound can exert physical force under the right conditions. Could the Egyptians have discovered something similar through centuries of observation and ritual? In 2014, an international team of engineers requested permission from the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities to conduct acoustic mapping inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. Their goal was to analyze how low-frequency sound waves traveled through its chambers, testing the theory that the structure might have been designed to resonate. The proposal was denied. Officials said the study risked damaging the monument, but researchers privately suspected another reason. The Egyptian government has grown increasingly wary of foreign projects that might challenge its official narrative of the pyramids as purely funerary structures. That same caution extends to other ancient sites. Requests to perform 3D scans or sound-based studies inside the temples of Dendera, Abydos, and Philae have been rejected repeatedly. These decisions, according to the Egyptian Antiquities Authority, are made to preserve sacred spaces and prevent pseudoscience. But to those familiar with the legend of the Cairo Codex, the pattern feels familiar. Whether out of protection, pride, or secrecy, Egypt has a long history of guarding the past from too much scrutiny. Even without the Codex, traces of its mystery seem to echo through Egypt's monuments. The Great Pyramid's internal chambers produce measurable resonance when struck, and its narrow shafts align with specific stars. The Serapeum at Saqqara, with its massive granite sarcophagi, creates deep bell-like tones when sound reverberates inside. Visitors to these sites often describe the sense that the structures themselves are alive, humming with invisible energy. While such impressions may be poetic, they point to something undeniable. The builders of ancient Egypt had a mastery of material and form that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. If the Cairo Codex ever existed, it might have been nothing more than the written reflection of that mastery, a glimpse into a world where sound was not just music or ritual, but a tool. Its disappearance, whether accidental or deliberate, has turned it into yet another forbidden artifact in a country filled with them. For now, the only record of its existence lies in the fragments of history that mention it in passing, whispers of a technology or a knowledge system that vanished along with the papyrus itself. If Egypt once mastered the science of sound, America's mountains may hide the proof of another forgotten species. In the wooded hills and winding valleys of the Appalachian Mountains, an old story has been passed down for generations. A story about a race of pale, small, strange-looking people who lived underground and came out only at night. The Cherokee called them the moon-eyed people, beings said to have enormous round eyes that couldn't bear sunlight. They were described as nocturnal, elusive, and different from any known tribe. Some legends claim they were wiped out or driven into the caves long before the Cherokee arrived. Others said they simply vanished, retreating deeper into the earth, where they still dwell unseen. For most of history, the moon-eyed people existed only in folklore, another Appalachian legend like lost mines or ghost lights. But in the mid-20th century, a series of discoveries in the mountains of North Carolina, Tennessee, and northern Georgia gave the legend a physical dimension. Archaeologists and local historians began finding unusual artifacts buried in caves and rock shelters. Small, human-like figures, carved from stone and clay, each with exaggerated round eyes and smooth, almost featureless faces. They didn't match the artistic style of any known Native American culture in the region. The more they were studied, the stranger they seemed. The first major find came in Murphy, North Carolina, near an old Cherokee settlement site. Excavators working along a creek bed uncovered several small statues about 8 inches tall, each humanoid, but with disproportionately large eyes and flattened noses. The figures' heads were wide and rounded, their features so simplified that they looked more alien than human. Locals who saw them began referring to them as moon-eyed idols. A few were donated to small local museums, but most disappeared into private collections. In the following years, similar figures turned up in neighboring states. Cave explorers in eastern Tennessee reported finding a cache of small stone carvings sealed in a rock fissure near the Huassi River. In North Georgia, a farmer digging post holes unearthed fragments of clay figurines that matched the same design. Round eyes, smooth heads, no visible pupils. Some researchers thought the artifacts might date to the Woodland period, roughly 1000 BC to 1000 AD, but no one could say who made them or why. They didn't resemble the realistic human forms typical of Mississippian or Cherokee art, nor did they carry the decorative markings found in Hopewell or Adena cultures farther north. What made the finds even more mysterious was how they lined up with Cherokee oral traditions. In one of the tribe's oldest legends, the moon-eyed people were described as a small, pale race that could see better by night than by day. The story says they built stone walls and lived in caves until a great war forced them to flee underground, never to return. The Cherokee claimed these beings had occupied the land before their ancestors migrated from the west. Some versions of the tale even suggest they were not entirely human. Archaeologists tried to separate myth from evidence, but the coincidence was difficult to ignore. The Fort Mountain stone wall in Georgia, a 900-foot-long line of boulders snaking across a mountain ridge, was long believed to have been built by the moon-eyed people. Early settlers in the 1700s recorded Cherokee elders saying the wall had been raised by white men with strange eyes who could not look at the sun. The wall's purpose remains unknown. It's too irregular to be a fortress and too massive to be a simple marker. Modern studies date it to at least 1,500 years ago, old enough to match the time frame of the legends. During the 1940s and 1950s, several amateur and academic expeditions began investigating caves throughout the southern Appalachians to document these relics. Many of the caves were located on federal land, and teams received temporary permits to excavate small areas. Early reports described not only figurines but also petroglyphs etched into limestone walls, circular faces with huge eyes, sometimes surrounded by radiating lines or geometric shapes. In at least one cave near the Little Tennessee River, explorers found evidence of ancient habitation. Fire pits, stone tools, and bone fragments alongside these carvings. Then, as quickly as the research began, it stopped. In 1958, the U.S. Department of the Interior closed several of the excavation sites, citing safety concerns and the need to protect endangered species. Access was fenced off and permits for archaeological work were revoked. Locals claimed federal agents removed several boxes of artifacts before the closures. The materials were reportedly sent to Washington for analysis, but no official record of their arrival or study has ever been found. When researchers later contacted the Smithsonian Institution, which manages many of the nation's archaeological collections, they were told the museum had no record of any Moonite artifacts or related finds from the region. The Smithsonian's stance has never changed. There is no evidence, they say, that such relics were ever catalogued, and the Moonite legend remains a matter of folklore, not archaeology. But that explanation doesn't satisfy everyone. Some of the original excavation photos still exist, showing the small statues lined up on tables beside catalog tags and measuring scales. Their shapes are unmistakable. Wide, round eyes set in smooth faces, eerily consistent across multiple sites. Private collectors claim to possess others, though none have agreed to public testing or verification. A few local museums once displayed reproductions of the figurines, but these exhibits were later removed after questions arose about the original's provenance. As for the caves, they remain off-limits. Federal regulations and private land ownership have made it nearly impossible for new expeditions to revisit the sites. Some are sealed behind metal gates. Others are located within protected forest reserves where digging is prohibited. In recent years, amateur explorers who've tried to gain access have been turned away by park rangers or warned of severe penalties for trespassing. Officially, the closures are about conservation and safety. Unofficially, they've given rise to the notion that the caves contain something the government would rather keep buried. The so-called forbidden nature of the Moon-eyed people relics lies not in their age, but in their absence. They were documented, photographed, and then erased from the record. Not disproven, but quietly forgotten. Every lead ends the same way. The artifacts are said to exist, but no one can see them. The caves are said to hold more, but no one can enter. Even the locations of the original discoveries have become uncertain, their coordinates omitted from official reports. Skeptics argue that the story is simply an example of how myth can fill gaps in archaeology. The figurines, they say, were likely misidentified burial objects or fertility icons from early woodland cultures. The big eyes could be stylistic exaggerations rather than literal depictions of nocturnal beings. As for the Fort Mountain Wall, it could have been a boundary marker or a ceremonial platform built by indigenous peoples long before the Cherokee arrived. Yet the consistency of the legend across different Cherokee clans, and the artifacts that seem to match it, make it difficult to dismiss entirely. The Cherokee stories describe the Moon-Eyed People as real, flesh and blood inhabitants who lived in the Appalachians before being driven out. They speak of battles fought under the light of the full moon and of tunnels that ran for miles beneath the mountains. Those tunnels, many believe, could still exist, sealed by time and earth, hiding whatever evidence remains of a forgotten people. In the end, the Moon-Eyed mystery sits somewhere between archaeology and folklore. The evidence is there, but scattered. The legends are vivid, but unverifiable. What began as a local myth has become a national curiosity, one that blurs the line between ancient history and modern secrecy. And whether the truth lies in lost artifacts, forgotten tribes, or something stranger, it's clear that the Appalachian Mountains still have stories they're not ready to give up. From buried tunnels in America to shafts drilled deep into rock, the final artifact takes us where history says no one should be, hundreds of feet below the earth. In the summer of 1889, on the outskirts of a small frontier town in southwestern Idaho, a team of workers was drilling for water. The crew was using one of the newest technologies of the day, a steam-powered drilling rig. And by all accounts, it was just another routine operation. They had already reached a depth of nearly 300 feet when, without warning, the drill struck something hard. The machinery sputtered, the pressure in the borehole changed, and a stream of muddy water shot to the surface. When the mud settled, the foreman noticed something mixed among the debris that shouldn't have been there. A small, human-shaped figure made of clay. It would come to be known as the Nampa figurine, one of the most controversial out-of-place artifacts ever found in North America. Barely an inch and a half tall, crudely molded, yet unmistakably human, it appeared to depict a woman. Rounded hips, carefully shaped arms, and a distinct head and torso. Its form was primitive, almost prehistoric, but the problem wasn't how it looked. It was where it came from. According to the drill operator's own logbooks, the figurine had been brought up from a layer of earth more than 300 feet below the surface, sealed beneath volcanic deposits and basalt flows, dated to nearly 2 million years ago. The discovery was first reported by George F. Wright, a geologist and member of the Boston Society of Natural History, who learned of the find from local engineers. Skeptical but intrigued, Wright arranged to study the object himself. The figurine, he noted, showed clear signs of human workmanship, the deliberate shaping of clay, traces of firing or hardening, and artistic details around the head and limbs. To Wright, this was no natural formation. He also confirmed that the layer from which it emerged lay far beneath any known human habitation site. If the reported depth was accurate, the figurine had come from a geological stratum far older than Homo sapiens, in fact, older than the earliest known ancestors of modern humans. The implications were staggering. Either the dating of the strata was wrong or the artifact was. In other words, it was either a modern intrusion, a piece of clay that somehow fell down the borehole during drilling, or it was proof that intelligent beings had lived in North America millions of years before history began. At first, scientists considered the simplest explanation, contamination. They speculated that the figurine must have been dropped into the hole accidentally, perhaps from the surface, and carried down by drilling debris. But the design of the rig made that nearly impossible. The borehole was narrow, only 6 inches across, and was capped by heavy equipment during drilling. The figurine had been ejected under pressure with the mixture of water and sand from the sealed layer below. Even skeptics admitted that it would have been extremely difficult for an object of that size and shape to fall into the borehole unnoticed, pass through hundreds of feet of sediment, and re-emerge unbroken. Wright presented his findings to several geological societies in the early 1890s, and the case was published in the American Antiquarian and the Proceedings of the Boston Society of Natural History. Each time it drew the same polarized response. Some saw the Nampa figurine as a hoax or a misunderstanding. Others saw it as a genuine mystery, a relic that defied conventional timelines. Another geologist, G.F. Becker of the U.S. Geological Survey, examined the site and came away more cautious but still intrigued. Becker concluded that, given the depth and the integrity of the borehole, the find could not easily be explained as recent contamination. He noted that the sediments from which it was extracted belonged to the Pliocene epoch, long before any known humans existed. Becker stopped short of calling the artifact authentic, but he admitted it presented a problem no one could solve. For a brief period, the Nampa figurine was displayed at the Idaho Historical Society and later examined by institutions in the eastern United States. Wright even brought it to Europe to show prominent archaeologists. Reactions were divided. Some dismissed it outright. Others, unable to explain it, simply refused to comment. Then, as attention faded, the figurine quietly disappeared from the scientific conversation. By the mid-20th century, few outside specialized circles had even heard of it. The artifact itself reportedly passed into a private collection after Wright's death. Its whereabouts uncertain. A few old photographs remain, showing a small clay figure with a round head and roughly shaped body. Its surface darkened with age. Without the object itself to test, modern researchers can only speculate whether it was truly ancient or simply misinterpreted. Despite its obscurity, the Nampa figurine continues to surface in discussions of so-called forbidden archaeology, discoveries that seem to place human artifacts in impossibly old strata. For mainstream science, such claims are cautionary tales about the dangers of poor documentation and wishful thinking. For others, they're reminders that the official timeline of human history may not be as complete as it seems. What keeps the story alive is how ordinary it all was. There was no lost temple or secret chamber, no explorer seeking fame, just a group of laborers drilling for water. The evidence was straightforward, the circumstances well documented, and the find itself simple enough to defy easy dismissal. If it was a hoax, it was an extraordinarily convincing one. If it wasn't, it raised questions that modern geology still isn't equipped to answer. Even skeptics concede that there have been other odd finds in the same region. Fossilized wooden tools, metallic spheres embedded in rock, and worked stone artifacts have occasionally been reported from ancient geological layers across the American West. Most are dismissed as natural coincidences or modern contamination. Yet taken together, they hint at a pattern, one suggesting that the Earth may still hold evidence of civilizations, or at least intelligent hands, far older than accepted history allows. The Nampa figurine's mystery deepens when viewed in context. During the late 19th century, archaeology was still in its infancy, and any discovery that didn't fit the emerging evolutionary model of human progress was often set aside. Finds suggesting great antiquity for humanity were uncomfortable, even dangerous to established science. Artifacts like the Nampa figurine were quietly filed away, labeled as curiosities rather than evidence. Over time, they were forgotten, buried not by nature, but by consensus. Today, only a handful of researchers continue to investigate the story. Modern techniques like thermoluminescence dating could easily determine the figurine's true age if it could be located, but its trail has gone cold. The last verified mention came from a private collector in the 1920s. Since then, it's disappeared entirely, one of countless artifacts that have slipped through the cracks of history. For some, that disappearance is part of the mystery. Was the figurine misplaced, destroyed, or deliberately hidden? No one knows. What remains is a single moment, a day in 1889, when a piece of fired clay surfaced from a depth where no human object should have been. Deep in the rainforest of southern Mexico, the ancient city of Palenque stands as one of the greatest achievements of Mayan civilization. Its temples, courtyards, and inscriptions have told archaeologists more about the Maya than almost any other site. Yet among its ruins lies something different, something that doesn't just tell a story, but poses a question that's never been answered. At the heart of Palenque, buried beneath a stepped pyramid known as the Temple of the Inscriptions, rests the tomb of a king, and above him, a carving that seems to defy explanation. The man entombed there was Kinich Janab Pakal, or Pakal the Great, one of the most powerful rulers in Mayan history. He came to the throne at just 12 years old in the year 615 AD, and ruled for nearly 70 years, transforming Palenque from a small city-state into a thriving cultural and political center. Under Pakal's reign, the Maya developed some of their most sophisticated architecture and mathematics, and their understanding of astronomy grew with it. To his people, Pakal wasn't just a ruler. He was a bridge between the human world and the gods, someone destined to ascend among the stars after death. When the Mexican archaeologist Alberto Ruz Lullier began excavating the Temple of the Inscriptions in 1949, no one knew what lay beneath. For 3 years, he removed layer after layer of stone, uncovering a hidden stairway buried intentionally by the Maya. At the end of that passage, sealed behind a massive triangular block, he found a chamber untouched for more than 1,200 years. Inside was a sarcophagus unlike anything seen in Mesoamerican archaeology. And when the team lifted its 5-ton lid, they were met with a sight that would change how we view the ancient world forever. The lid showed a single, intricate carving, a man reclining at the center of a complex scene, surrounded by swirling patterns, flames, and celestial symbols. His face, unmistakably that of Pakal, is turned upward. His hands appear to grasp a set of handles or controls. His right foot presses on what looks like a pedal. Beneath him, tongues of fire or exhaust seem to pour out from the base of a structure that resembles a machine. Even to the untrained eye, it doesn't look like a simple mythological design. It looks mechanical. For archaeologists, the official explanation came quickly. They concluded that the image shows Pakal at the moment of death, falling into the underworld. The flames represent the earth monster swallowing him, and the lines and patterns surrounding him are vines from the world tree, the cosmic axis linking the heavens, earth, and the afterlife. The tree's branches rise above him, leading to the celestial bird that represents resurrection and eternal life. In short, it's a spiritual diagram, a visual map of the Mayan belief system. But for others, that explanation didn't fit. To many engineers, scientists, and alternative historians, the carving looks far too technical to be symbolic. The posture of Pakal mirrors that of a modern astronaut seated in a spacecraft, knees bent, hands gripping controls, eyes facing forward. The fire below him looks like exhaust. The curved lines rising from his face resemble an oxygen hose or breathing device. Some even point out that the entire composition resembles a rocket viewed from the side, its base flaring, its pilot inside. When the photo of Pakal's sarcophagus lid spread globally in the 1960s, it reignited a debate that still continues today. Swiss author Erich von Däniken featured it prominently in his 1968 book, Chariots of the Gods, calling it the most compelling evidence that ancient civilizations may have had contact with visitors from the stars. To him, Pakal wasn't descending into the underworld, he was ascending into the sky. Skeptics dismiss this as sensationalism, but the image itself has never stopped drawing attention. Even with today's understanding of Mayan symbolism, the carving stands out as unique. There are no other depictions like it anywhere in Mayan art. The sheer density of detail, the mechanical precision of the shapes, and the absence of clear mythological elements make it difficult to categorize. For a civilization that depicted nearly every aspect of its cosmology with repetition and clarity, this one carving remains an outlier. To understand it, you have to look at the culture that produced it. The Maya of Pakal's time were mathematical and astronomical masters. They built their cities in alignment with celestial events and used advanced calendar systems that remain astonishingly accurate. The Temple of the Inscriptions itself is a cosmic monument, its stairways and doorways oriented to capture sunlight during solstices and equinoxes. The walls inside the tomb are lined with over 600 glyphs recounting Pakal's lineage and achievements, some referring to his ascension to the heavens and transformation into a god. Modern analysis of the carving using high-resolution imaging has revealed another layer of complexity. The patterns that form the world tree and the surrounding bands of symbols aren't random. They align with the path of the Milky Way as seen from Palenque around the time of Pakal's reign. To the Maya, the Milky Way was the celestial serpent and the king's journey mirrored the sun's nightly voyage through it. Whether myth or message, the lid is both an artistic and astronomical blueprint, a way to immortalize the king's transformation into a celestial being. Still, mystery surrounds how the Maya achieved such precision in both carving and cosmology. The entire sarcophagus, carved from a single slab of limestone, was lowered into its chamber with millimeter accuracy. The lid itself weighs roughly 5 tons and fits perfectly into a recessed groove, creating an airtight seal that protected the tomb for over a millennium. When Lullier first entered the chamber, the air inside was so still that his torch flickered from lack of oxygen. Even after centuries underground, the tomb had remained perfectly preserved. But not everything about Pakal's tomb has been accessible to the public, or even to science. Since the 1990s, the Mexican government has restricted all physical access to the sarcophagus. Only a handful of archaeologists have been allowed to study it directly, and requests for 3D scans, casts, or molds have been repeatedly denied. Officially, these restrictions are meant to protect the site from damage and humidity. Unofficially, many believe the government wants to avoid fueling renewed speculation about ancient astronaut theories that could overshadow its academic narrative. In 2018, an international team of researchers sought permission to conduct non-invasive laser scanning of the tomb to create a digital reconstruction for preservation purposes. The project was approved, then suddenly canceled. No official reason was given. Several archaeologists privately claimed the decision came from above, pressured by cultural agencies to prevent new interpretations. The only detailed studies that exist today come from photographs and tracings made in the 1950s, leaving modern technology unable to re-examine one of the most famous carvings in the ancient world. Even Pakal's remains have been the subject of secrecy. DNA testing was never publicly released, and requests to analyze the bones were declined. To this day, only the plaster replica of the sarcophagus lid in Palenque's museum is open for visitors. The real one remains sealed underground, guarded and monitored, but rarely seen. Who was Pakal, really? To the Maya, he was both man and god, a ruler whose power came not just from his dynasty, but from his perceived connection to the cosmos. He ruled during a period of immense intellectual growth, when Mayan astronomers tracked eclipses with mathematical precision, and priests measured time in cycles of thousands of years. Pakal's imagery may represent a metaphor for his role in that system, a man bridging earth and sky, embodying humanity's place in the cosmic order. Or perhaps, as some continue to believe, it's something more literal, a record of an encounter with technologies or beings long lost to time. Either way, the carving endures as one of history's most mysterious messages, suspended between faith and science, myth and machine. In the city of Tiruvananthapuram, in the southern Indian state of Kerala, stands a temple that looks, at first glance, like countless others across the subcontinent. Gold-topped spires rise above courtyards of polished granite. Pilgrims pass through its gates each day, offering flowers and prayers to Lord Vishnu, the god of preservation. Yet beneath its floors lies something no other temple on earth possesses, a network of sealed chambers that hold one of the greatest mysteries and greatest treasures in recorded history. This is the Padmanabhaswamy Temple, and at its heart is Vault B, a door so sacred and so feared that no one has ever opened it. For centuries, the temple was famous throughout southern India as a seat of immense wealth and divine power. Its recorded history stretches back more than 1,000 years, though local tradition claims it was founded far earlier, in the age of the Mahabharata. The temple's name comes from the form of the deity enshrined within, Vishnu reclining on the cosmic serpent Ananta, a symbol of infinite time. Everything about Padmanabhaswamy reflects this idea of eternity, even the secrets sealed beneath it. The temple was long managed by the Travancore royal family, one of the most influential dynasties in India's history. According to temple records, the rulers considered themselves mere servants of the deity, protecting his wealth and property on earth. In 1947, when India gained independence and princely states were absorbed into the new republic, Travancore's last Maharaja declared that all temple riches belonged not to the crown, but to Lord Vishnu himself. That single decision ensured that what lay beneath the temple would remain untouched, at least for a while. For centuries, there were rumors of hidden vaults under the sanctum, filled with offerings from kings and devotees, gold coins, gemstones, crowns, and idols made of solid precious metals. These stories were dismissed as folklore until 2011, when India's Supreme Court ordered an audit of the temple's assets after a legal dispute over its management. What the auditors found beneath the temple floors would stun the entire nation. 6 vaults were discovered, labeled a through F, each sealed behind heavy iron doors. When the first 5 were opened, the scenes inside looked like something out of myth. Piles of gold coins stacked to the ceiling, jewel-encrusted crowns, diamond necklaces, and statues made of pure gold. There were ancient coins from the Roman Empire, golden thrones studded with rubies, and ceremonial weapons forged for kings who'd been dust for centuries. Experts estimated the treasure's total value at more than $20 billion, though some believed the true figure could be much higher. But one vault remained sealed, Vault B. When workers attempted to open its door, the temple priests objected fiercely, claiming it was forbidden to do so. They said the vault wasn't merely a treasury, but a divine chamber protected by the serpent god himself. Legends describe how anyone who tries to break its seal would be cursed by the Naga guardians that dwell within. According to local lore, Vault B can only be opened through specific sacred rituals performed by an initiated priest, rituals that have been lost to time. The entrance to Vault B is unlike any of the others. Its door is sealed not with locks or hinges, but with intricate stonework carved into the shape of enormous serpents. It bears no handles, no visible mechanism, and no inscription explaining how it was constructed. Some describe hearing faint rhythmic sounds from within, as if something inside the chamber is moving, breathing, or alive. The priests say these are the sounds of divine energy. When the Supreme Court's appointed committee insisted on opening the vault in 2011, the temple's hereditary priests staged a protest supported by thousands of local devotees. The head priest declared that attempting to open Vault B would bring catastrophe not just upon the temple, but upon the entire world. Some newspapers mocked the claim as superstition. Others recalled earlier tragedies. In the 1930s, a previous attempt to explore the underground chambers had been abandoned after a series of unexplained accidents, including the sudden illness of several workers. The government hesitated. The Supreme Court eventually ruled that the vault should remain sealed until further notice, citing religious sentiment and temple tradition. Officially, it was an act of respect. Unofficially, it marked the point where law and faith collided and faith won. Since then, Vault B has never been opened. Only the priests are allowed near it, and they perform daily rituals outside the sealed door to honor the deity within. Even photography of the vault's entrance is banned. The area is off-limits to archaeologists and scientists, guarded by temple officials and private security 24 hours a day. Despite this, stories about what lies inside have only grown. Some say it holds treasure far greater than that found in the other vaults, possibly artifacts dating back to before written history. Others suggest it conceals something entirely different: sacred scrolls, ancient technologies, or relics from a lost civilization predating the Vedic age. In a land where myth and history often overlap, the imagination runs wild. More practical theories exist too. Some researchers believe the vault might contain temple records and offerings too delicate to be exposed to air after centuries underground. Others suspect the legends of curses were intentionally created to deter looting during India's colonial period. A spiritual security system designed to protect the temple's riches from foreign plunderers. Still, there are details that defy easy explanation. Engineers who have examined the temple structure note that Vault B appears to be sealed from the inside, not the outside, as if the chamber was designed never to be opened again. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted before the court's order confirmed that the vault connects to several smaller chambers and tunnels, some of which appear to extend beyond the temple's foundations. Local workers claim that compasses and metal detectors behave erratically near the vault, and that the stone around it gives off faint electromagnetic readings. No official study has confirmed this, but the stories persist. In 2016, The Supreme Court reasserted that the vault would remain sealed until a new management committee could decide its fate. That committee, composed of state officials and temple trustees, has yet to reach a conclusion. Each time the issue is raised, religious leaders reaffirm their warning. Vault B must not be disturbed. What sets Padmanabhaswamy apart is how much of its mystery is verifiable. The temple's wealth is real, the vaults are real, and their secrecy is protected by law. Yet that single sealed door at its core turns fact into legend. Outside, pilgrims still gather daily. For believers, the unopened vault is proof that divine mysteries exist beyond human reach. For others, it's a symbol of authority and control, a place where faith keeps curiosity firmly locked away. The treasures found in the first 5 vaults proved the legends were true. For now, it remains sealed, guarded by tradition, protected by faith, and watched by those who wonder what truths lie on the other side. In a world where everything feels accessible, one door remains closed by decree of gods and men alike. If you've made it this far, you know that history is full of questions it still refuses to answer. Some of these artifacts might be real, others may be legend, but all of them remind us that discovery never really ends. The truth isn't lost. It's just waiting to be found. Now it's your turn. Tell us in the comments which artifact fascinated you most. We'll be replying to our favorite theories. And if you want to keep exploring the mysteries history can't explain, click the video on screen and make sure you're subscribed for new deep dives every week. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay curious.